In this video, we're going to talk about monohybrid inheritance. Inheritance is the study of genetics, of how genes are passed on from parents to their offspring. And now we're going to talk about how those genes are passed on and how we work out what the offspring will look like, what characteristics the offspring will have. So we remember genes are inherited from an organism's parents, and the different combinations of these genes makes the individual unique. Genetic inheritance controls the individual characteristics of all living things. Remember, a gene codes for a protein, and all of those genes on your DNA codes for the different proteins that make up your body and determine the different characteristics that you have. So there we have the genome. Inside the nucleus of the cell, we have lots of chromosomes, which is made up of DNA. They're all made up of DNA, and on that DNA are certain sections of DNA called genes. We've just done protein synthesis and learned that genes code for specific proteins. So a gene is a section on the DNA that codes for a specific protein and hence determines a certain characteristic. Alleles, this might be a new term for some people. Alleles are different variations of the same gene. So you could have it, for example, in the example we're going to use just now, in pea plants, we could have the allele for purple flowers or the allele for white flowers. They are different variations, and of course, every individual has two alleles, one from the father or male parent and one from the mother or female parent. We're going to talk about some genetic definitions and some terminology that will help us to start to construct genetic crosses and work out how certain traits are inherited. So the first term is a genotype. The genotype is the type of genes present. So it's the genetic makeup of an organism in terms of the alleles present. Of course, there are two alleles on each individual's chromosomes, one on the chromosomes from the mother and one on the chromosomes from the father. So the genotype is represented by two letters, and those two letters will be one from mom and one from dad. The phenotype then is how that gene is expressed, whether you end up with characteristics from one allele from the mother or from the other allele from the father. So the phenotype is the physical features of the organism due to that genotype. Okay, it's the appearance of the characteristics. So here we have a little table showing you the phenotype is the flower color. That's the expression of the gene. And the genotype is the alleles present. And we'll explain the difference between the capital P's for the purple flower color and the small p's for the white flower color in a moment. Now we're going to deal with some definitions that relate specifically to the genotype, and it helps us to understand what the phenotype might be dependent on the genotype. So the three terms relate to the genotype of the individual, and they'll help us to predict the phenotype. Dominant, an allele that is expressed if it's present, and there you see the capital P. We use capital letters to show the dominant allele. So if the genotype is dominant, it will show up in the phenotype. Opposite of dominant is recessive, an allele that's only expressed when there is no dominant allele. So if there are two small p's, there you see the lowercase p is for the recessive allele. If there were two lowercase p's, then we would see the recessive allele show up in the phenotype. If the genotype is recessive, it will not show up in the phenotype. And then a third term, codominance, when neither of the two alleles is dominant to each other. So in other words, when they codominate, you will see some of each of those. For example, in red and white flowers, that's the example I've used here, red and white flowers, you might end up with a flower that has some red and some white in it. Okay, so there at the top there is the dominant alleles showing a purple flower, two dominant alleles. The next one is two recessive alleles shown by lowercase letters. And if we have two of them, then we can see the recessive phenotype. And the last one, capital R, capital W, R for red flowers, W for white flowers. And the result is we get a flower that has both red and white on it. Two more definitions. Homozygous, homo meaning the same. Homozygous means they have two identical alleles of a particular gene. So it'll be two capital letters or two small letters. So capital P, the phenotype would have purple flowers because both alleles are dominant. Small p, the phenotype would have white flowers because both of the alleles are recessive. Two identical homozygous individuals that breed together will have pure breeding. That is, they will have offspring that have identical genotypes. Heterozygous is having two different alleles of a particular gene. So capital P, small p. The phenotype would be purple because dominant allele, capital P for purple flowers, is present and is expressed instead of the recessive allele, small p. So they would have purple flowers. The genotype is not pure breeding, so offspring of this genotype, capital P, small p, would have different genotypes.